Hi everybody. We will start shortly. Yeah, just waiting for everybody to settle in. Hey,
Hello.
Hello.
hey, Sam. Let's start in a second. Oh, Fontes. There you go. AB.
Yo.
Right. Let's just start, no?
Let's do it.
We do it. Cool. Hello, everybody. For those of you, as if you're new faces, so if you haven't attended Voltz Town Hall, we do this every first Thursday of each month. So welcome. We just usually recap what happened the last few weeks and what we're working on. And today we're gonna have Simon and Arthur speaking, but we also have Joanna and Fontes as part of Volt's team. So feel free to just jump in, guys, if you want to discuss anything. And we probably go through rollover, which we had a massive one, some improvements we did to that process to make it even smoother, and also some community feedback we got around P&L and how we calculate those and how we name it. There were like long discussions on Discord, and we always say the same. building this together. So if there's any feedback you want to share, we always try to implement it as soon as we can. So cool. Let's begin. So Philip here as well. Where are you? Let me bring you up stage. We're recording this as well, so if for whatever reason you need to jump off, we'll be sharing it tomorrow on all our regular channels. And yeah, let me share something with you, Arthur. 1 sec. There you go. Cool. How's everybody? Simon, Arthur, you good to go?
All good.
Nice.
All good. All Gucci, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe Simon, do you want to start with like general Voltz update? Since it's not been long since the last one, really.
Yeah, I was just looking back on that actually. I mean, it's only been 3 weeks. So we tend to do this. Well, it's not that we tend to do it. We do it every month. I think from memory, the previous one got delayed by a week. I can't actually remember why. But it means that there's only been 3 weeks since we last spoke. I think it got delayed actually, thinking about it, so that we could announce version 2 of the protocol and then do the community call.
True. That's right.
Which which obviously just means it's been a bit of a shorter period of time. But despite that, there's still obviously been quite a lot going on. So I think last time, in terms of notional traded, there was less than 17 billion. I think now there's close to 20 billion. So it's been about close to 1 billion a week over the past 2 weeks, which obviously cool to see people using the protocol that much. And then alongside that, there's also been a ton of work going on in the labs team on V2 alongside a bunch of other things. So we can talk about that a little bit later. And like in terms of like trading stuff that's been available, there's been 2 rollovers, and there's one which was the week of the last call, which obviously didn't go kind of as to plan. There's something which kind of basically went wrong. And I'm mindful that there's a bunch of people that jumped in the community kind of asking when they're going to be able to settle, that type of stuff. And it did take a few days. It's obviously not the way it should work, and not kind of what everybody expects when they're trading. We then obviously had a huge rollover at the end of the month, where pretty much every pool except for one matured and got rolled over. And what's really nice, and hopefully people saw this, is that kind of issue that happened before, it kind of didn't happen again, and everything worked as intended. So meaning people were able to roll over immediately into the new pools. You're able to withdraw if you wanted to, settle if you wanted to, and take your money out, which is obviously exactly how it should be working. So I appreciate the frustrations around the one a few weeks ago that didn't go to plan, but obviously really good to see that stuff is now fixed and working exactly as intended. And then alongside that, I'm trying to think what else. There's obviously been some, we're going to talk about this as well in more detail, is the P&L stuff. So adding realized and unrealized P&L into the trader form and the portfolio page for traders, and then adding the realized in for LPs. And there's been some community questions around that, so we can talk about that in more detail. But that's essentially it. And obviously in the background, there's loads of work going on. So there's only 8 people in the labs team full time. So for an 8-person team, I can reassure you everyone's like 150% productive. There's heaps of stuff we're working on.
Yeah, totally. Maybe I put you on the spot, but should we kind of like, since there's so many people on the audience, maybe go through what should the trade expect when rollover happens?
Yeah, so pools on Voltz have terms, which basically means that there's a maturity date, and when you're trading, when you're entering a swap, you are effectively entering that swap till maturity, and you can essentially unwind by taking the opposite side, which is why you can end up with both realized and essentially unrealized P&L, where the unrealized is what would happen if you were to take the opposite side at any given point in time. But because they have a maturity, what that then means is at the point that the pool's terms ends, as a trader, you've got the option of either rolling over and entering a new trade on the next pool, or just settling a position. Which, if you're in the money, involves taking like more margin out than you put in. If you're out the money, it involves taking less margin out than you put in. And what people should expect on the day that the pool matures is for kind of rollover and settle to be available kind of relatively soon after the pool hits duration. That could be an hour, it could be 2 hours, just depending on some process stuff. Obviously, what happened with the one that didn't go to plan, there's a bunch of things. Well, there's one thing that went kind of wrong, frankly, which has now been fixed. And that meant that settle and rollover wasn't actually available for a few days, which clearly shouldn't happen. But the rollover that just happened over this past weekend, hopefully everyone saw that the settle and rollover was available within a few hours. Maybe the only other thing that's worth adding, so in the build up to a pool maturing, the LP optimizers become unavailable for new capital 48 hours away from maturity, just because it kind of arguably doesn't make much economic sense to put liquidity in at that point in time. And then from a trader and LP perspective, the majority of pools will now close an hour before maturity. So previously it used to be 24 hours before maturity. Now the majority, not all of them, but the majority will close an hour before maturity.
That's worth mentioning, right? Because maybe some of you as traders, you've been used to having like pools that we disable trading 24 hours, especially before maturity. Now it's just 1 hour, and they become enabled. We try to make it as almost instant, but like few hours later. Cool. Sorry, I put you on the spot, but I thought it would be worth like going through these processes. It's something that it's part of Voltz fundamentals, how our pools work. So is continuous work on our side to keep it like as smooth as possible and improving every single step. Cool. So then you also mentioned another improvement to the UI, especially, and I guess more towards the user and like seeing what is their position at any specific or given time, like what is the P&L and how is it performing. So that's something we implemented maybe was like 2 weeks ago or 2 week and a half. And we've been listening to your feedback as well, and we just released, I think yesterday was a new update on that. But maybe you, Simon, and Arthur want to go a bit deeper on how P&L calculations work.
Sure, I'll let Arthur take this one actually, and then I can jump in.
Okay. Yeah, sure. I guess one of the main piece of feedback that we have been receiving from the community, and I guess realizing ourselves as well, is that it was quite difficult for traders and LPs to be able to have a real-time view of what their P&L profile looks like. And what we kind of set out to do with this new release is to effectively build out the infrastructure that enables people to see in real time what their P&L looks like. So if we just zoom into traders and then kind of LPs, that would perhaps be helpful for people to better understand what these numbers mean and how they're derived. So kind of when thinking about the traders who enter into fixed or variable taker swaps on Voltz, there's two types of P&L that they can have at any point of time: the realized P&L and the unrealized P&L. Where the realized P&L is P&L that they has already accrued to the trader, and the unrealized P&L is the P&L that they would receive if they were to completely close their position, which in context of interest rate swap trading, closing your position is equivalent to taking a swap in the opposite direction with the notional amount that's equivalent to your current position. And within the if we just go a bit deeper into the realized P&L, given that unrealized is pretty straightforward, the realized P&L is then further kind of split into the fees that traders have to pay in order to initiate swaps, and the actual cash flows generated by their swaps, where those cash flows are basically dependent on how the variable rates evolve over time relative to the fixed rate secured by the swap, as well as any locked-in profit that traders have been able to collect by prematurely closing down their positions. And this locked-in profit tends to be a function of the fixed rate at which the position is created and the fixed rate at which the position is either partially or fully closed, relative to the maturity of the pool. Because one thing we kind of need to keep in mind is that all the cash flows and P&L generated from interest rates are proportional to the maturity and the amount of time has left until the end of the pool. And so that's kind of a kind of the way kind of would go about understanding and interpreting trader P&L. And if we just like take a step back and potentially zoom in into the LPs as well, the P&L of LPs is just effectively the realized P&L of LPs is just the mirror image of the P&L of traders. And what I mean by that is, as traders get into swaps against LPs, they obviously pay fee income, pay fees, which accrue to the liquidity providers who happen to be in the tick range fixed rate range along which the trader was trading. And as soon as the traders are locked into a position, whatever positive or negative P&L they generate has to come out from somewhere, and that somewhere is, well, the balance of liquidity providers who are on the other side. That's why it's very important to keep in mind that whenever you are providing liquidity on the protocol, it is very important to choose the fixed rate ranges carefully, because in a scenario where, as a liquidity provider, if you end up getting locked into either side of the market, you will end up accruing P&L, which is dependent on this fixed rate that you select in advance. One thing to just keep in mind is that in the most ideal scenario where people are constantly trading back and forth along your tick range as a liquidity provider, you will not be really accruing any P&L from actual cash flows generated by those swaps, because in that instance you would be continuously basically offsetting your position against variable takers and fixed takers, which is the ideal scenario you want to be in as an LP. Again, this is something you like LPs have to consider and think about, and try and make sure that their tick ranges are actually in a region where they would expect there to be balanced trading volume. And
one question. Sorry, Arthur, just sorry for interrupting you. But I guess like this, like swaps cash flow is what some people have been asking like more questions around and trying to understand. Do you mind, like, just a theoretical example? Again, I'm putting you on the spot now, but if you could come up very quickly with, like, let's say for a pool, the rate currently is like at 4%. How will like an LP have to behave to kind of like decide on like the tick ranges? Maybe I don't know if there's something we could come up very quickly on stage, just to be a bit more specific. Maybe it solves some questions there.
Yeah, no, I guess the key idea is that the swap cash flows of LPs are kind of, as I said before, are just the mirror image of the P&L generated by traders who trade against those LPs. But if we take a concrete example where, let's say, there's a liquidity provider who has deposited liquidity between I don't know, 1% and 2%, and someone comes in and trades in the variable taker direction, and takes a position that's worth, let's say, 1 million worth of notional. So if the trader takes the variable taker direction in their trade, it means that the LP is taking the opposite, so the fixed taker direction. and the fixed rate at which this interest rate swap contract effectively between the trader and the LP is initiated is determined by the fixed rate that the LP chose. So if the range is between 1% and 2%, then the realized fixed rate that the LP ends up paying or receiving, depending on which side they take, is just going to be an average of that. So in this case, let's assume it's 1.5%. So let's say this trade has taken place, and let's for simplicity assume there's no fees. At the maturity of the pool, the trader will be able to collect their settlement cash flow, their P&L, which is going to be the notion which is equal to 100 times kind of the realized variable rate minus the fixed rate that they were paying if they took the variable taker position. And then the P&L of the LP would just be the opposite of that. So 100 times the fixed rate minus the variable. And for simplicity, let's assume that the pool duration is 1 year, in which case we don't need to downscale this P&L by time. And that would be the swap cash flow of the LP, and the opposite of that would be the realized P&L from cash flows of the trader. And then the fees just, in case of LPs, the fees just supplement their, like, increase their P&L, and in case of traders, they bring them the P&L down. But yeah, that would be probably like a simple scenario to consider.
I think it's worth adding that that is in a scenario where there is only one trader that trades against the liquidity provider's liquidity, and the way in which LPs and we put this out in kind of various different places, but the kind of easiest way for the LP to remove any risk associated with swap cash flows, which can clearly also be positive or negative, but the easiest way to do that is to deploy liquidity in a range where there is balanced FT and VT trading activity. Because if we play through the example that Arts just talked through, in that example, a variable taker has come in and traded against the liquidity provider's liquidity. If no one else comes, then the LP is effectively acting as the FT. So their cash flows are the opposite of whatever the variable taker is generating. However, if another another fixed taker, so you've had a variable taker trade against liquidity of the LP, which is one side. If you then have the other side, so a fixed taker coming in and trading against the liquidity provider's liquidity, what that's effectively doing is that FT that's coming in is then knocking off the LP from that FT position, meaning that the liquidity provider's capital is no longer effectively acting as the FT on the other side of the variable taker's swap. And therefore, they've just collected fees. So they're no longer exposed to any potential positive or negative P&L of the swap cash flows, but instead they've collected fees from the first trade and they've collected fees from the second trade. So when people are looking at LP P&L, like clearly the fees line and the swap cash flows lines are two really important pieces of data. The more fees, the more kind of trading activity that's taking place against your liquidity. If you are just seeing very little fees and just experiencing swap cash flows, then that is most likely driven off the fact that you're deploying liquidity in a range where there is not balanced trading activity, and therefore you are effectively acting as the opposite side to whoever trades against your liquidity, be it FT or VT.
Want to jump in?
Oh, we can't hear you. Broccoli, we lost you.
Went for a broccoli break.
Yeah. Ah, he's gone. Who'd have thought?
And just to build up for something.
Can you hear us?
Maybe we can talk through some of the Q&A.
Yeah. There's sorry, he's just messaged. I can hear you. You don't hear me. No, we definitely don't hear you. Why don't we go on then and talk about some other stuff that's been happening in the background? Yeah, I know, rugged. Some other stuff that's been happening in the background, because they're kind of the things which have been released and, like, I guess most visible to everybody in the community, which is rollover, and then obviously these improvements to P&L. But alongside that, there's obviously been a ton of work that's been taking place in the labs team around version 2 of the protocol, alongside some other stuff around potential kind of improvements and both to the app, but also to the kind of markets that are available. Nothing necessarily new to announce right now. Clearly, version 2 is something which we wanted to get the light paper out there as soon as we could, so other teams could start reading through it and thinking about the ways in which they could integrate with version 2 and this kind of like non-custodial clearinghouse that's being created. What's really cool to see actually is there were a ton of different teams that did reach out off the back of that, just thinking about how they could build on top of it. If people in the community are kind of either or listening to this community call, or either other DEX teams or thinking about building their own stuff, or kind of friendly with other teams that might benefit from kind of all of the benefits that come off the back of creating these low-level rails and a single margin account for traders. Obviously, we encourage people to reach out, and we're always happy to talk to people through our thinking and help them understand potential ways that they could integrate with version 2. There are going to be kind of in the not too distant future some I guess announcements around version 2. Like I said, nothing to announce at the moment, but we are excited but between now and potentially the next community call, or maybe a little bit after that, to start making some more announcements and more noise around version 2 and all the things that unlocks. But in the meantime, I think it's predominantly just all the trading and opportunities that are available on the markets that are currently live on the protocol. And obviously, we're going to keep shipping stuff to improve the app and to try and improve trader experience. We're always here in the community, of course, to answer questions. There's tons of people that come through with tickets. And just here to help people understand the protocol and understand how to trade. I don't think we're going to get Broccoli back. He's well and truly rugged us. So why don't we? The problem is some of these questions which you have are then marked against my own name, so I'm just going to be answering my own question. Why don't we do some of the ones which don't have my name? So, Arta, how is the fixed interest rate determined immediately after the term begins?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I guess purely from technical perspective, whenever a pool is launched on the protocol, the first ever fixed rate is dictated by the first ever LP that deposits their liquidity within their range, and it just ends up being the average of the upper and lower fixed rate. Historically, we've been making sure that trading on the protocol starts to open up as soon as there is sufficient liquidity for people to actually roll over their trading positions. So for most people who just trade whenever they see new pools, the fixed rate would already be initialized by whoever was the first LP in that pool. But one thing to keep in mind though is that the fixed rates in those pools cannot just be naively rolled over, if that makes sense. So you can't just take whatever the final fixed rate is in the previous pool and just use it to initialize the new one. I mean, you can, of course, you can do that, but one thing that you would need to keep in mind is that the fixed rate at the end of the pool that matures is relative to the maturity date that's effectively a few blocks or days away, let's say. But as soon as the rollover happens, the maturity is going to be potentially 1 month away, which means that as an LP, the fixed rate that you set in an ideal scenario would be your view of what the expected variable rate would be at the maturity of this pool. But of course, that's something that we can't really know for sure in advance, and that's why we have interest rate swap markets. But that's how I would at least think and reason about kind of how setting a fixed rate in the beginning would have to work.
Nice. Some other questions. So I sometimes like to see other people's LP positions, like the Uniswap V3 LP screen. Do you have plans to implement that screen? Artur, I'm going to come back to you for this one.
So I think the Uniswap V3 LP screen is pretty interesting because there's the LP flow before an LP position is initialized, where you can there's a nice little widget that you can use to move the price ranges in context of Uniswap. That is definitely something that we could also introduce in our UI, and Broccoli has been doing a lot of magic behind the scenes, incorporating some of these ideas into our product roadmap, and over time we'll be releasing more and more of these quality of life improvements for LPs as well, but not just for LPs, for traders as well. And that's of course just the beginning of the journey, and then there's going to be a bunch of work on the portfolio side to also help LPs better monitor and manage positions that they've already created, which is going to require more thinking in context of Voltz rather than Uniswap, I guess, just given that the complexity of maintaining a position on Voltz is arguably higher, given things like liquidation risk and position locking and so on and so forth. There's a lot of thinking and work happening there, and I'm excited to gradually release those and see how the community reacts, and also keen to make sure we incorporate feedback as we go along.
Cool. Thanks, Artur. Who else can I go to here? So, classic question, when token? I'm tempted to reply with the classic answer soon, but we've said in the past, Uniswap, DAO to DAO vote. There's a reference to token there. There's going to be something at some point, but when token, honestly, is not something that we can answer, of course. Will there be something for old fans with OG roles? That's for Broccoli to answer as and when he can get his microphone back. How many seasons will there be, and on which chains? Again, no kind of firm answer around that. There's each of the seasons basically runs quarterly. Season 4 is not going to start until next quarter. At the moment, obviously, those seasons are available on all the chains that Voltz is live on. I think it's kind of likely that that's obviously going to continue, but who knows how many seasons they're going to be. It really is a feature for the community, so it depends what the community wants around that. Other types of questions. So do you plan to add some kind of onboarding for newcomers to make Voltz available for mass adoption, or is it only going to be crypto degens and traders only? There is a bunch of work that's happened around this. There's I guess the various different ways in which Voltz can become more accessible to more people. That exists both on creating new content, which helps explain the way that the protocol works and helps explain not just the way the protocol works, but also how interest rate swaps work and what the potential benefits associated with that are for people either looking to trade, looking to hedge, maybe looking to construct structured products off the back of it. So there's definitely more content and educational kind of material that will be put out to help explain that to people, which is not just people who are new to interest rate swaps, but also people who are already active on Voltz and looking to understand the kind of mechanism a little bit better. Then alongside that, there's continued work, which hopefully everybody that's been using Voltz for a while will see this. There's been a lot of work gone into improving the app to make the protocol more accessible and more intuitive, just in terms of taking positions, understanding the P&L that you're generating whilst you're in a position, understanding how to unwind, all these types of things. And there's obviously going to continue to be a lot more work which goes into that. Given Voltz is a new primitive, it's not like there's other places you can go and learn how interest rate swaps. You can only really come to Voltz and trade it as an instrument. So we're mindful that the interface has to be a way that helps explain that to people. But hopefully you've seen a lot of the progress there, and there's obviously a lot more to come. Another question, so plans to add more L2, for example, Optimism, Polygon. This is another thing which is kind of happening in the background at the moment, just exploring these potential new chains. For anybody kind of paying really close attention, there's a Twitter space that happened last week with the Avalanche team because they've announced this new institutional subnet, which is something which we find kind of interesting. That's not necessarily something which is going to open more things up for the community right now. But there's certainly more work which is going on there, and we are continuing to explore new chains and new markets that kind of open up trading opportunities for people in the community. And then, final one before we go to any other questions which are coming up. So do you plan on adding additional investment strategies except leverage put call options? I'm trying to understand this. So I think version 2 of the protocol it provides opportunity to add new instruments and new exchanges, which therefore opens up the potential for people to build new trading strategies that combine various different instruments that might exist through kind of Voltz-led exchanges or through other exchanges that exist across the ecosystem. In terms of us releasing content explaining the strategies that you can build using an interest rate swap specifically, so there were a bunch of different quant articles that were put out through the course of last year, kind of exploring things like statistical arbitrage that you could deploy that got to like various levels of depth. And there kind of will be some content around that which will be created in the future. At the moment, if we go back to kind of one of the earlier questions, there's a lot more time and energy being put into helping make Voltz more accessible. So helping to explain kind of what an interest rate swap is, what it means for you, kind of how you can trade that, kind of how you can use it to hedge rates, and then also putting time into improving the interface versus building out like more sophisticated quant strategies. But there are people in the community that come through at times and kind of talk about that stuff. And if people have strategies they want to share, then obviously encourage people to do that. Cool. I've got to do this is Broccoli. This is a hard job. You can't say anything, but I feel for you. Broccoli is answered. So OG roles are for Discord only. OG got to see all the early action like Univote. Yep, that is true. And then more crash. So no further questions from site for me. No further questions, period, I think. Cool. I think that is all. So we're going to have another community call, obviously, next month. Make sure you look out for it. Make sure you look out for the announcements that are coming up pretty soon. Promise Broccoli won't get rugged for that one. And have a good day, everyone.
Awesome.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.